thank you everyone who's joining in with us today. As we started out the day with a quote from Kwame Ture, I'm just going to reiterate that to reground us in why we're all here. Ours is not to teach the people to be conscious, but to make the unconscious conscious of their unconscious behavior. Because unconsciously, instinctively, they seek freedom. And he also adds, the only route to consciousness is through struggle. And so our press conference today, I want to introduce to you some of my dearest friends in the struggle and comrades in arms and resistance. And so to begin with us, with this press conference, I would like to introduce to you a friend of mine, Darakshan Raja. Darakshan is a Pakistani Muslim immigrant woman from the Bronx who moved to Washington, D.C. in order to impact social policies. She has worked on a range of issues, including organizing against anti-Muslim racism and state violence, gender-based violence, human rights abuses, and the national security system and the criminal justice system. She is a co-founder of the Muslim American Women's Policy Forum and serves on the advisory board for API, Domestic Violence Resource Project in D.C., an organization that serves API survivors of domestic violence and physical assault. Most recently, Darakshan worked with the Urban Institute Justice Policy Center on a range of criminal justice evaluations spanning across crime victims' rights, juvenile justice, gang violence, and violence against women. Darakshan holds a master's in forensic psychology and hopes to strengthen grassroots support and resources for activists and organizers directly impacted by state violence, and to increase collaboration between movements to move towards intersection, organizing, and collective liberation.
Thank you so much, Sierra, for introducing me, and also to everyone here for holding this tribunal. The role that I'm actually going to play today is more as the co-director of the Washington Peace Center, an organization that's local here to Washington, D.C., sort of started out as it's a strategic place for providing education, resources, and support for mobilization. We have a long history of being involved in the anti-war movement. During the Vietnam War, we were a center for draft resistors, and since then, have been pretty consistent in terms of being against war in its entirety. And before I go into my particular remarks, I do want to center the space and say that we must remember that Iraqis have paid the price for really sustaining our country, which is built upon white supremacy. It's a settler colonial state, it's capitalist, and it's patriarchal. And millions have been killed since the 90s. The occupation in Iraq not started in 2003, it started way before then, and the U.S. involvement in the larger region of Middle East, North Africa, South Asia has been going on really for a very long time. It's really that we've seen this escalation of violence. This outright occupation of nations does not just happen in the beginning. There's so much more that pretexts that. And then at the same time, to really center the resistance of the Iraqi people, the reason we are here, the reason we hear these stories, that is a testament to their survival, to how they've resisted, to how they still organize. And that for us, as particularly being in the United States, we're not neutral parties. Whether we agree with this war or not at the individual level, we're living in a structure and a system that does support the war, and through that, we are financially supporting through tax dollars this entire apparatus. And so it's really important that as we enter into this conversation, that we do not view ourselves as neutral parties, even if at the individual level, even if as organizations, we are completely against this war and U.S. imperialism in its masses. At the same time, being a Pakistani Muslim woman who has myself been impacted by war, and even that my entire identity as of right now, the Muslim communities, the racialization of Muslim with Pakistani, Iraqis, Syrians, you name it, has been racialized in the context of the national security system. So when we talk about the mass support for this, it really comes from the idea that my humanity is only as relevant as your national security. And so that undermines why there's apathy sympathy towards this issue, and also why there hasn't been the kind of public outrage and outpouring that we need. We are living as Muslims right now domestically, being seen as your foreign bodies of security threats in the context of war. That is what I operate within. And so if you are doing any work also around Islamophobia or xenophobia, it's important to remember that the pillar in which we are being positioned is that justification of U.S. militarism. And it's deeply connected to the violence that is happening in our home countries and the communities that we come from. The other thing I want to talk about is that a lot of times in our movements, we speak about the cost of war. We know that within Iraq, it will probably cost us about $2 trillion and even more so. At the macro level, we can make this argument and say that we know that this guts social services, it guts the true things that local communities need. But where we have a disconnect is that the military, the war apparatus has been so normalized that it markets itself as being profitable and as being part of your survival. My entry point into this work very much came about a few years ago as a young student in the Bronx, working class, in immigrant communities, in Black communities. And there, the military's presence was there since public high school. It was normal. It was normal to have folks say, join the military. But the military was positioned as a way for you to to have class mobility, rather than being seen as poor folks that are turning around and leeching off social welfare, that this was your ticket to respectability. You would be serving the nation. You would be serving the country. And so as I joined as an intern AFSC and their other options to militarism program and went into my own community, I was devastated to find that there were more military recruitment centers than there were schools, than there were actually local community centers. And as I went to speak to these military recruiters who were Black and brown, who looked like me, they would say things such as, you could get your citizenship if you join the military. This is an easy 40,000 right now, just sign up. We're talking about in a community where, for me as someone who's taking care of my family, my annual income was about $20,000. For in that condition to be given 40K when you're only about 19 years old, just think about the way that they are selling the military. There were other things that they would say, such as, many people do not have the money and funds to forget traveling abroad or traveling to other parts of the country. They don't even have transportation money to take the subway or to go to work. And here was someone telling you, this is going to be your free trip to the world. You can go to Japan. You can go to the Middle East. And so that is how they would position it. And then there's also a context here of particularly the hyper-masculinity, the ways in which the men were being sort of seen with cars and having money and looking a certain way. And so when we talk about trying to organize against this military infrastructure, this military system, I don't think that our movement has actually really sat down and thought about how war positions itself in America, how it makes itself look lucrative. We know in the end that, yes, veterans are coming back with PTSD. People have committed suicide. Black and brown folks who join the military also face massive violence. But that is not the story that they tell you. The story that they tell you is, this is your economic viability. This is your respectability. This is your ticket out of the hood. And so, again, in our movement, when I look around and I see folks with class privilege sitting here, I worry that how disconnected we are at this moment when we have a Trump administration that is deeply built upon xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, and when they're promising that they're going to bring jobs, I think we should be ready that they're bringing jobs connected to the military state itself. And they're going to be working class communities who are going to go, even white working class communities who are going to work in those manufacturing companies where there are weapons, and they're going to make this individually lucrative for people who are trying to get survival. And so if our movement, again, is not going to be strategic, is not going to have an organizing center, and at the same time really center directly impacting communities. I don't mean center directly impacted communities to bring us up here to talk about our traumas and the pain, and then completely diminish us and not include us in leadership, not include us in actually directing the strategy and directing the analysis. We are far more than just weeping cries victims. We are also survivors, we're also thrivers, we're also warriors. And so it's really imperative and key that this movement, in order to really be a movement, start really shifting the way it's shown up. Thank you.
And finally, for the press conference, we're going to have my brother Chenault from U.S. Labor Against War speak. Reese has spent almost 12 years as a union and community organizer. Currently, Reese is a national coordinator for the U.S. Labor Against the War, and Reese was also recently a community organizer with One DC, a nonprofit that seeks to exercise political strength to create and preserve racial and economic equity in DC.
How y'all doing? All right. I'm gonna do this a little different. I'm gonna tell this story from two perspectives. Darash, I knew that was coming. U.S. law and my life to illustrate the parallels between us and where our roads have diverged. So U.S. law began in 2003, and it did a lot of good work. AFL-CIO passed a resolution in 2005 coming out against the Iraq War. Now, I know resolution doesn't sound that great, but the reality is that for a long time, the AFL-CIO was known as the AFL-CIA because of the way that they compromised themselves and often cooperated with the federal government to take down leadership in other countries and do other really nasty things. And that legacy followed them. So taking the step to actually come out against U.S. foreign policy together in a convention was a pretty big deal. At that time, I was at a college in Virginia, at HBCU, called Virginia State University, and I didn't know U.S. law yet. That's where I met my friend Dakari. It was actually the reason I'm up on this stage today. We became friends. He supported me as I grew into activism and introduced me to the reality of the divide between my burgeoning political message and his life. He did a lot to educate me, and he didn't have to do that. At that point, U.S. law and I probably crossed paths at some rallies and some actions. But for the most part, we still didn't really know each other. Dakari explained that he felt that if we were friends, he should probably shoot straight with me one day. And he sat me down and he said, the marches we go to are actually pretty silly, he thought. In fact, he told me that while he was certainly opposed to war in all forms and had his own thoughts about politics, he thought that we were in a time of criminal rulers and a corrupt system. But he couldn't go to this stuff anymore with me, and I wasn't that surprised, to be honest with you. I saw the look of consternation on his face as protesters from the Black Bloc would move through the crowd and occasionally engage the police in a way that he knew he never could. And I also saw the sadness when he looked for other students from HBCUs and could not find them. Often, we were black dots in a sea of white faces. It prompted me to ask the question, which is now my big question that I carry with me for the rest of my life, which is what in your life experience is missing from my political analysis? Dakari and I worked together. Dakari and I worked together, and we reached some new people because I changed the way that I viewed my relationship with those people. They were not fuel for my activist fire. They were my comrades that I was walking with, and I had to take their experiences to define my view of what it meant for justice for all of us, not just my own political analysis for myself. I started union organizing the same year that U.S. law was founded in 2003. Dakari died that same year by himself in a Baltimore alley, and his diploma was given to his parents posthumously, as he was a semester away from graduating college. "13 years later, we're at war all over the place, and for most of my adult life, we've been in an armed conflict. U.S. law saw the need to change the way it engaged with labor and foreign policy, and also a need for changes internally. Some of y'all in the room right know Michael Eisenhower. He'd been working there for 13 years. But he decided he wanted to retire. And after a long search, they hired me, which I am mystified about every day. I was hired to move things in a different direction and acknowledge this new perspective. And in April, we held our convening where we provided labor leaders of a snapshot where organized labor and our bloodthirsty foreign policy still intersect to this day. We had some really hard discussions, but we walked away facing the reality that labor and the anti-war movement had a lot in common. Both lily white and both with an aging constituency that was looking for new people. To fight, we needed to grow. We needed to ask my question for D, my big question, which is what in your life experience is missing from my analysis. Focus developed on two things within that convening: internally challenging the notion of solidarity by having some tough conversations with union members who work in the military-industrial complex, We also had some externally challenging. We also had to externally challenge the notion of solidarity by showing up to fight Islamophobia within our unions. Because as this election clearly shows, we got a lot of work to do. We had to become better listeners so we could be better organizers and leaders. Foreign policy can seem really esoteric and far away, and peace can seem like this work of disconnected hippies from a bygone era. We struggle to get people in the door, I think, because we're focusing on the wrong thing. I work to engage union members in this critical time of Islamophobia and Trump and climate catastrophe and endless war and abysmal wages. I know it's not disinterest or a lack of attention that I face. The attacks are coming from everywhere, and my people just struggle under the weight. Getting people in the door requires that I widen the doorway, not simply try to shove people through my narrow vision of what it means to do anti-militarism work. And this is my open challenge to every person in this room. I think about Dee all the time. He died my best teacher. And I now have the gift of a beautiful son, Justice, and he's 2. And I work to free his life of endless war. And so I challenge you to think about the question that I put before you and wonder what this movement will be, because I think we should be a movement that chases Dee's powerful spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reese. And Reese doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. Reese and Darshan have been incredible friends to me as we were building this tribunal, and I'm really appreciative of their support.